organizational Hey everyone, Happy New Year. Thank you all for coming this evening. We're going to get started since it's already a little bit after 5:30, and I'm going to ask Mrs. France, who is our committee co-chair for education, to open up the committee, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, I'd like to bring the Education Committee meeting to order. Tanya?
Thank you, Mrs. Franz. This evening's agenda is up on the board for everyone to take a look at, and we'll just scroll down through there. The first one is just an announcement regarding the annual data presentation for 21-22 data. This is something that we do every year. As soon as we have the data that's released from the state, we'll be doing our presentation on the 21-22 data, and then our midpoint, because this data was released a little bit later this year, our 22-23 data as of the midpoint of this year. That will be held at the board meeting next Monday, January 9th. It'll be about an hour-long presentation. The public is welcome to join us for that data presentation. The second item on the agenda for this evening is the comprehensive planning update. We completed our comprehensive plan. We submitted all of those different plans and sub-plans to the state. Everyone seems to be getting those plans back with some comments and some things that they want updated. We were also one of the school districts who got ours back with some of the things that they wanted us to update. They are definitely being more critical than they have in the past, and some of the things are not things that we're expecting. They're giving us some guidance as the process moves forward. They're not things that have been given to us up front. So one of the things at Peters, our Title I school-wide plan that has to be submitted every year, was returned to us. In the past, they had just asked for us to put in the amount. They had asked us how we're going to be spending the funds. This year, they wanted to know exactly the dollar amount that was going to be spent within those grants and how that was going to be funded. They also wanted some subgroup performance and non-performance data within the Future Ready Comprehensive Planning Portal. The only data that Peters gets, because it's a K-2 building, is attendance data. So that's typically what we report. They also asked us to report on local testing data as well, so we included that. And then we resubmitted that, and it was reapproved on December 9th of 2022. So that plan is finalized. Slatington Elementary's Title I school-wide plan was also returned for corrections. The steering committee member role needed to be updated. We were very specific and put in the actual title the person had. They wanted a very general category, so we had to go back and just adjust that. Again, exact dollar amounts for spending of funds. It's not something they told us up front, but something they asked us to do later. So we went in and we specified exactly how much money was being spent and for what purpose. And then we received that reapproval notice on November 21st of 2022. The overall comprehensive plan was also due this past year. That was returned as well for some things. The academic standards and assessments, which is chapter 4, it was returned for more information within our curriculum framework and certain things that were taught in what grade spans they're taught in, specific action steps and or processes to build upon the strengths found in the classroom teacher observations. There's a new requirement this year for language and literacy acquisition. That's something they asked us to specifically spell out in our professional development plan, which is our Act 48 plan. Our gifted sub-plan, they wanted specific evaluation processes described in more detail, so we've redone that as well. And this was not something that they originally did. And we are a phase 3 school, so our things are part of a cycle, a 3-year cycle. We submit them as part of a phase 3. Phase 1, they're going to be asking for articulation agreements, which are the dual enrollment agreements that we have with institutions for our high school. That was not an original requirement for us, but since our plan was still open, they asked us to submit those early. So again, something we didn't know was going to be asked for, but we're complying. So we are in the process of getting our articulation agreements together and submitting those as well. Those updates are due back to PDE next Monday, January 9th. So we are we'll be submitting that on January 9th. Once the comprehensive planning cycle is done, the following year, we have our 339 or our comprehensive guidance plan that's required. So that is required of us by March 31st of 2023. Our school counselors, Mr. Stroll, that committee of core people has been really working hard on that. We actually met today for about half a day to finalize what our plan looks like. That will be discussed at the advisory council meeting that we have on January 16th. We'll bring that back to this education committee in February. We're not required to, but we will post that publicly for the public to view, just for transparency. And that will be posted until the March board meeting. Again, that's not required. And then it'll be voted on at the March board meeting. Again, that's not something that's required, but just something that we've typically done with our comprehensive planning components. So we're intending to do that again. And then we'll submit that to PDE by March 31st of 2023. Any questions on the comprehensive planning process?
Do you know why they came back with asking for more stuff? I mean, was it from a federal versus state?
If I had to guess, I would say the federal government is probably looking at them under a microscope, and so they're doing the same thing with the districts as well. At one of the assistant superintendent's meetings I was at, we had a conversation. Pretty much everybody is getting plans of some sort back that were in that cycle.
Thank you, I was just curious.
Sure. So I will hand it over to Mr. Pine for a Canvas update.
Sure. So just in terms of Canvas, I mean, right now the high school has gone fully through all of the basics. So all the high school teachers know how to create content. We're going to move in the second part of this year in terms of design considerations and then some of the stronger assessment tools within Canvas at the high school level, while also starting phase 2 at Slatington Elementary in the middle school. And they are now, as of this last professional development day and moving forward, learning how to create content in Canvas and how to design in Canvas. At Slatington Elementary in the middle school, we're already they're already using it. They're using it as a communication tool. Principals are using it in order to get information out to parents and families, but then also within groups in order to use that as a professional development tool with our faculty and staff. So that outlines there all the topics that we're covering, but that's kind of in a nutshell where we are and where we're going.
Okay.
Any questions on the Canvas platform?
Any stumbling blocks you guys have had?
No, I mean, honestly, we actually planned in this middle of the year with some redundancy between the November and December in-service days because we realized that people flex out in those days. So we planned in so then that way we'd be able to make sure that everyone was caught up and trained by the end of December. Yeah.
Great plan, thank you. Is there a time you're going back to ask how it's going?
So
that you can kind of tweak if needed?
Sure. I mean, that's a great idea broadly in terms of a survey. Actually, at the December in-service, and it may have not been the best timing. I did put in a session at the high school to have a meeting and allow people to voluntarily come down, provide some feedback. I had one teacher who came down with very positive feedback that things are going well. So I'm taking that as a good sign. I'm taking the quietness of that morning as I sat there in the high school library as a sign that people at the high school are feeling pretty good about it. I think some other constituencies obviously didn't have that opportunity. I mean, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
I guess also including students and families. How,
Sure.
Are they utilizing it, or is it just becoming another thing that's out there that we have to go check?
Yeah, so anecdotally, I feel really good, but I think you're right. I think something measurable in order to indicate whether or not people are using it and how they're feeling about it, I think we can take steps to do that. Yeah.
I think data always tells us where we're going.
Yep.
So it's helpful to take a look at.
Yeah. It's good.
What about Peters?
So Peters is not even on the table until next year. We want to get through it this year, kind of take a look at how it works, especially as we expand it down through Slatington Elementary School. I mean, the way I understand it is that Canvas will more so be a tool for parents and teachers than for students at Peters Elementary, but we're trying to evaluate as we move through the rest of this year with Slatington Elementary what that might actually look like. I think that there are opportunities for teachers to structure and organize content and educational opportunities in there. It just may not look the same.
Yeah.
And I can update you on top of that just because I'm there every day. We are pretty much our entire our student bodies and their families are all enrolled in Canvas. if you remember, once they're in, as they go through the system, they stay in. So this is going to make it a lot easier moving ahead. As they go from second grade to third grade, it's not like a big, to do to try to get everybody to sign in. Right now, a lot of the teachers are using it as their main communication tool or as like sort of the backup tool. And we will begin, actually got an email today from Ms. Dunham. We have our sort of homepage set up, which, takes sort of more work on my part, sort of creating a class and power school for the entire school and sort of differentiating grades and whatnot. But that's all set up now, and then I'm hoping to basically roll that out over the next month so that I can then use both our community outreach system as well as Canvas as a communication tool, and then just make it something that parents, I'm going to check in there, and then as we go into our implementation, it'll be something that at least it's on their radar and will be an easier transition as we go through.
Okay. The next one is Mr. Hauser with NLMS Peer Tutoring. We're always looking for opportunities for our students to come to us with ideas, and I think this is a really good example of that.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Dr. Stoker and I wanted to just brief the committee and everyone here on some of the good stuff happening this year at the middle school. We've really emphasized building a positive climate and getting kids more involved in that process as we explore student leadership, what we call our Inspire program. This marking period, our focus was being Bulldogs determined. That was our motto and our emphasis. And as we went through a lot of different events and incentivizing certain things, I had a student come to me just out of the blue, wanted to make an appointment with me, and this student has just been a remarkable role model this year. And she sat with me and said, hey, I know some kids are struggling with their grades and they're having a hard time getting back into the swing of things, and I'd like to help, and here's my idea, and had written out this whole pitch for a peer tutoring program, complete with where it would be, when it would meet, who could supervise it, what kids she thought would be good at it. And so I think this is great. So we worked on polishing that up a little bit, and in a couple of weeks we're going to implement it. She found a teacher, Mr. Derek Reiner, to supervise that during the flex period. So she's developing a team of 8th grade students who will tutor their 7th grade peers. They're going to put some surveys out to see what subjects need the most work. Mr. Reinert's there in case anything needs a teacher, and he'll also be working on some extra tutoring and help for the 8th grade students. We felt that little age difference there between 8th and 7th would be better for the kids to work in. But just kudos to my students and my faculty for stepping up, and it's nice to see those leadership endeavors sparking some innovation just intrinsically from our kids. So kudos to that student, who I promised her I'd keep her nameless until she tells me she's all right putting her name out there. So.
Yeah, but at least she felt comfortable enough to come to you. I mean, that's a big deal to do.
It is. And I just got an email, can we talk, ? And of course, that could be anything.
Oh, yes. Oh, no.
I was unprepared. And,
That's like at home. Can we
yeah,
talk?
I mean, she came in, and it looked like that. It was all typed up, and she said, here's what I want to do, and I said, hey, kid, let's polish it and let's make it happen. So we have a hopeful start date of the middle of this month, likely start date right at the end of the marking period, and that'll just complement what we're doing with our Inspire program and keep everybody's grades where they need to be. Cool. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hauser.
Next up, we have high school IXL purchase. Mr. Pine?
So I don't want to steal Mr. Rashevsky's thunder on this. I know he's up next, so he can sort of jump in at the end. But this is going to be the expansion of our IXL use. We are currently using IXL at the middle school as an assessment tool. Just to give you an idea of what this is, it works in some ways, for those who are familiar with Study Island, in some ways similar to that, in that there are practice opportunities that are skill-based, in some ways a little bit differently. It also has a benchmarking tool, so throughout the course of the year, the students, through these snapshots, which are periods of time where they're assessed in order to validate all the other practice that they have are then placed at levels and then identified as being in need at a variety of skills. And that'll backtrack through grade levels to what their need is. So if they have a need in math in 6th grade, it will help identify where that strand begins back in 4th grade so that they can work their way back up to resolve that. So it includes that. So for the classroom teacher and the students, it includes opportunities for practice and ongoing skill development, but then it also does provide us with scaled scores and levels throughout the course of the year to determine how that works. I see the real benefit of this being that a lot of times when we get benchmarks, we look at it 4 times a year. We don't know week to week whether what we're doing is adding to that outcome those 4 times a year. Now the students and the teachers will really be able to see as they're moving forward whether or not the work they're doing is adding to that outcome. So I don't know if Mr. Urshel, if you want to talk about the pilot at all. It was a successful pilot.
I can say I didn't know it was a pilot until we got to like December and realized that we don't own this. This is just a pilot. Our teachers are utilizing IXL as if we've always had it. When I first got here in August 24th, Mr. Stroll and I sat through an in-service with Malaysia Dunham, and our teachers were chomping at the bit, particularly math and as well as ELA. And I have to say, it's a great tool for closing learning gaps. We just came out of a pandemic, or I should say we're still in there a little bit, maybe. We still got a foothold in the pandemic, but still, learning loss and everything that was associated with it, this is our tool that we're utilizing at the high school to close those gaps. And it gives a branching type technology for the students so that in the event that they get something correct, it then gives them progressively harder type problems, and then gives us a baseline as far as where they're at. So I have to say, it's something that's being utilized by the math department, by our ELA, and we'd like to go forward with this. And from what I understand, this will continue to be a free pilot from January through June 30th, if we intend on going forward with this purchase from July 1st for like 3 years.
So I'll say that. So yeah, so this 3-year agreement that's linked in there, that is being paid for out of the high school budget over a 3-year period. As a result of signing on for that, we are getting the remainder of this year free, in line with the first half of the pilot.
So the program in and of itself, my daughter uses it too, and I see that it builds on itself. So I see the student parent side. I'm curious what the faculty sees and what they do with that data, and how do they utilize that data and teach using that, and not just allow the computer system to do that. I mean, I'll send them to a virtual school if that's the case.
Well, it's just a tool. I don't want to give the impression that it's the teacher. The teacher ultimately is in charge and sets up the learning objectives. We have opportunities for students, say, that have an IEP, and just doing the math problem, they don't necessarily have to have like an 80% or more. Just so the teacher has the discretion and the professional, license to go and say, okay, you did this, you can move forward or see where they're at. So it's not 100% computer generated and moving forward. The teacher, like I said, can decide, and then not to mention a student to the right may be working on, say, 9th, 10th grade type content. The student to the left may be working on 4th, 5th grade content. So you could differentiate learning and it looks the same. And the teacher's the one that's calling the shots with it. So that's the one thing. It's not a situation where the technology and the computer are doing the teaching. The teacher's still calling the shots. The teacher still needs to navigate the student, because the students get bored, quite frankly, of just drill and kill on a computer. There has to be a level of interaction face to face. But this tracks and determines mastery, and those diagnostic testing that Scott was talking about are very important. Just to do checkpoints throughout the year, and then when it comes time for PSSA and Keystones at the high school, we have good idea as far as where we're learning and as far as where we're at. And all we're trying to do is nudge them from, say, a below basic to a basic, from a basic to a proficient. We're just trying to get our students to go one step forward, and IXL has that opportunity to nudge them forward and help the teacher with that.
I just know she spends a long time. If she misses something in there, she's sitting on that computer for hours trying to get to that proficiency level. And at some point, when does the teacher step in and say, you've worked on it too long, let's talk about what's going on, because I think that part might be missing. Because like I said, she'll sometimes, depending on what it is, she just sits there and just keeps hitting the button. She's not learning a damn thing, I'll be honest. It's just a repetition of it. So soon or sometime, somebody has to step in and say, you only have this amount of time, and if you don't get it, we're going to teach this. Because I think we're missing that part of it, and I get it. It's a great program to see where we are, but I think we're missing that next step of the computers. I understand what you're saying, the teacher's kind of doing that, but I feel that there's a lot of just clicking happening. Just to get to 100%.
Parents to do that are in the situation that you're in would be to certainly contact the teacher. That to say that I just see my student hyper-focused on the mastery component, and we're not really seeing much learning. That kind of thing is where I would say, the parent can certainly reach out to the teacher. And keep in mind, we're in this, like I said, as a year one pilot at the high school.
Sure.
I believe the middle school has been doing this for what, 2 years? 3 years?
Yes, and I can address a little bit of that too. There's a parameter in IXL that you have to get, I believe it's an 80% to get it labeled for it to bump up. So sometimes the teachers don't set the percentage there, and they have kids working for the goal of being able to move up. And then there are things that can be standalone lessons where they can put the brakes on or push on the accelerator a little bit more depending on what's going on there. So that just might be maybe something in the directions that we have to clarify, because we do have 2 days a week where we want kids trying to progress at their level, where we have focused flex periods, one for ELA and one for math. So I think there might be some of that going on in there, but we can definitely reevaluate those directions. Regarding how the data is used at the middle school, we do conduct data meetings in conjunction with our team meetings. And one of the things IXL does, which is wonderful, once there is what we call a snapshot, used to be a benchmark, IXL uses a snapshot, it will actually automatically group students by comparable data points. So that as the teacher, you can say, okay, if I'm going to split this class up into 5 groups of 5, I know that these 5 kids have something in common, these 5 something in common. That can be strength, weakness, or what have you. And it'll also break it down, particularly in ELA, by comparable skills. So it'll be, these 5 might be weak just in a comprehension of reading. These 5 might be weak in grammar and writing concepts. So it can also delineate between topics like that, which is very nice. So for example, in November, we had kind of a big data meeting with each team, and we saw that some comprehension skills, probably from not reading with any degree of fidelity for 2 years, were an issue. So that became the focus of instruction in the next month, where we took some in-service time and we said, here's what it's telling us. These 3-4 things are kind of weak. The example is context clues. You can't figure out what this word is. You read the paragraph around it to determine that. Kids were lacking there, so we had everybody focus on that a little bit. So that's how it's being used, to put a lens on what we're doing instructionally while still working through our approved curriculum.
So so then this is my question. I was in that chair and I did that. At what point do we educate every curricular area in our staff on context clues, on good reading comprehension type of strategies, so that in health class they're getting the same exact instruction that's expected in our English class? Because what I'm hearing is, and which is how we're going to grow as a school, is not until every instructor is on the same page with every strategy that's important for improvement. I go to English class, it's not just the English teacher's or reading teacher's responsibility to improve those scores, it's everybody's. Same thing with math. Now obviously when we get into higher learning math, higher levels, I can't expect people to understand all those concepts, but certainly the primary concepts can be used school-wide. We're not there, and that's what scares me, and we're going to keep spinning our wheels in the mud with not improving our students because we're not looking at this globally, looking at this as a singular curricular issue. So me sitting in this chair as long as I have this seat, I'm going to keep pushing that we not only use our technology for that, which IXL is a great tool, by the way, As long as teachers are getting the right data and they're using it effectively, and then we start, as an administration team, get that out to every staff member in the school, so that my phys ed teacher and my computer tech teachers are all on the same page. So when there's reading involved in their classroom, they're doing the exact same instruction, and we get that repetitive all day long. And that's how we're gonna turn the corner.
Yeah, and the middle school has started exactly that, Mr. Kern. Every faculty meeting, we do a data focus on academics, and there's, again, 2 or 3 things to kind of put the lens until we get to the in-service day. You'll see in the next forthcoming in-service days, I would imagine there's going to be a push in literacy. There's initiatives from the state coming down. Middle school's been doing that. December we did not. November in-service we did, where we focused on particularly how to engage students when talking about what they are reading. And then we also focused a little bit on some vocabulary strategies, because in basic comprehension, that's where we seem to see our greatest discrepancies from what's considered grade level or next grade level versus
Right.
where the testing was. So we are in the beginning phases of.
I understand, we gotta start somewhere.
But yes.
Yeah, we're not gonna, learn how to be an Olympic swimmer by jumping in the pool, I get it.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make though is then through walkthrough, after all that in-servicing is done and we get through your walkthroughs and your observations, then have to depict those areas. Are we on the same team? That's the bottom line. And I know our scores are gonna be horrible, and I know what they are already. I already looked at the data. So I'm not worried about that. But where do we go from now? Where do we go from here? And it's not just improving scores. It's improving instruction and our strategies on improving, the process, how our kids are learning. That's the important part. And once we do that, I think the rest will take care of itself, or it should. So if we're looking at data and where kids are failing and how we're instructing kids globally, I think we're gonna see a big difference very quickly. It doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out, slow process if we're all on the same page. So I'll shut up now, thanks. But you have my vote. IXL is a great tool. It's wonderful.
And I think he said it very well. Tool. It's not everything. It's a tool in a teacher's toolbox. And I think right now, from the feedback I got from department chair for math and from the department chair for English, ELA, IXL seems to be hitting the areas that teachers need to work with students as a tool, a resource. And I think we're going to start to utilize the resource better, kind of like what the high school will be doing, what the middle school is doing. This, like I said, we're on 3-4 months into IXL. I can see this grow as time goes on because of the diagnostic features. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what, I'm just thinking about some ideas with Mr. Stroll and I, maybe in our next faculty meetings, sharing that data and saying, hey, listen, can we do some of these 2 or 3 things, writing-wise in other areas? Mm-hmm. Why not history, social sciences?
Exactly.
Why not, like you said, it could be even a health class.
Right.
And then even in some different classes, I'm thinking about Mr. Bennett with there's a lot of math in the classes that he's teaching. Mm-hmm. If there's some things that we could certainly hit those points, hey, let's cross the cross content areas.
That's what we're doing.
And I think that what IXL does is give us the diagnostic information to share with teachers. And I think we need to start moving in that direction. That's a good point.
Are there any other questions on IXL? Do we have the ability from the board members present to move that quote to the board meeting for a vote on Monday night?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. The next topic we have is high school algebra sequence. Mr. Rashevsky?
What we're going to do with algebra is move this in a direction where we're condensing some classes, because we were really taking bite-sized pieces for, say, our applied section. If you look at it, we're looking at 3 courses that are currently the pathway towards an algebra keystone. So a student would come from the middle school, take an algebra concepts class, then take an algebra part A, then an algebra part B, and then that algebra part B would then trigger the keystone assessment. Now we're actually doing keystone assessments tomorrow at the high school for the winter, the students that took that class. So that would be like, call it the lower track. We're looking to make that from 3, bring it back to 2. So the students would then just take one course in algebra concepts, and then in algebra 1A and 1B would be just algebra, okay? And that would be essentially what we would be doing going forward over the next 2 to 3 years. The next level, which would be, call it an academic type algebra, we're looking at 2 courses. Well, from 2 courses essentially to 1 course. So from 3 to 2 with the lower end. On the middle end, we're looking at 2 courses, okay? Moving away from 2 courses to just algebra 1 course when the scheduling changes. And then honors, there will be no difference. We have students who are in 8th grade in Mr. Hauser's middle school. That trigger course would be algebra in 8th grade, and then they would take the Keystone exam at the end of 8th grade, and then in high school we would then just move forward with our sequence of study. What we're looking essentially to do is move, not next year, because I think this is going to be a 2 to 3 year process, but we're looking at over 2 to 3 years, moving from the block scheduling to a more traditional type schedule. We did some surveys with schools across the Lehigh Valley, Carbon Lehigh, the IU, and some other schools of this similar size. And we're starting to see the value of possibly moving in a direction of a traditional type schedule. And to do this, I think that this change that we're looking at with algebra would move in that same direction. In addition to this too, just to plant a seed down the road, I'm also looking at, for the biology keystone, what are we doing about ecology? What is that doing for us? And more of an integrated science or a physical science. So we're looking at some more things with regards to not just math, but with biology and with literature as well. But it's next year for 23-24, we're looking at the same type of block scheduling. Perhaps the year 24-25, we would then be able to move forward with, say, a traditional type schedule. But this would be a step in that direction.
Any questions on that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for the education committee this evening?
Actually, Mr. Prochaska, going from block to a more standardized scheduling, did you get feedback already from current staff and students, what their thoughts were? Like, do they want to stay with block scheduling? Do they want to go to more?
There was a lot of feedback that was done over the last 3 years. And the feedback was to move, from what I understand, from a block to something different, okay? The thing that moved forward with me in terms of the staff, they like consistency, but they're also looking for opportunities for co-planning, collaboration. Mr. Kern gave a great example just 10 minutes ago about the need for content areas to speak with one another. Right now with the current schedule, we have very few opportunities to do that, so we need to make the most of those opportunities. So we're looking for a schedule that would provide department time for collaboration. But to answer your question, has there been, I think it goes 2 to 3 years before me. And what I've seen this year is, for us, a desire to move in the direction of, say, from block to something else. That something else seems to be a traditional type schedule. And that, with the staff I've talked to, seemed to be more welcome than something that would have varying type days. But to go to something that's more consistent and predictable, and while at the same time provide department times. And the other thing I'm looking at too is arts. We have a very difficult time right now fitting in some things like music and maybe music and instrumental and some other type content like that, some courses that we haven't been able to run. The block scheduling kind of binds us into a very solid, firm structure that doesn't have variance. The 7-period or 8-period day of a traditional schedule would provide more opportunities for, things like music and some arts that we haven't been able to do in some other classes, some electives that have not been possible over the years. Plus the opportunity to learn. I mean, we have to do some good staff development as well, because the teachers are teaching a certain way, but I think a 2 to 3 year process provides that ability, I think, so the teachers hit the ground running as well as the students.
So this definitely predated, these conversations predated your time here, because this is something that we've been talking about I've been on the board 5 years, maybe we've been talking about it 4 years, and I apologize, I leaned over and was whispering while you were talking, because I was like, I remember we had a launch date for this, and then it was pushed back 1 year, which was supposed to be 23, 24, right?
Our original launch date was 23-24. We're pushing
Okay.
it 1 year.
Okay,
And part of the reason for that has been, quite honestly, the change in leadership at the high school. Meaning that whenever you go through a significant leadership change, significant initiatives, significant work, we need to make sure we have stability in the principalship position at the high school. So with losing a half a year last year without having a dedicated high school principal on site, Mr. Stroll did a phenomenal job playing multiple roles for an entire semester, actually a little bit more. And then with Mr. Rashevsky coming in at the start of this year, we lost ground. We lost ground in that work at the high school.
what I'm hearing, maybe this isn't correct, is that the goal is 24, 25 now. Is it, how loose is that goal?
It's a goal.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm not willing to lock in a definitive date because we got to go through the process.
Definitely seen the pros and cons of both of them. And somebody go through where they went through the traditional, they went through the block scheduling, and then they reverted back. And one of the number one things that's coming up again with traditional is the stress on both the students and the staff, because it's a much tighter time frame, it's a much tighter teaching time, it's a much tighter constraint. So those students are going home having that much more work to do, and the teachers are going home having that much more work to do. Coming from traditional in my own learning, I didn't know the difference. But seeing the actual change in students moving backwards to the traditional teaching, I would ask that we relook at what our students feel. Because I'll be honest, there's a lot of anxiety not knowing and seeing what it is. My son's going through it right now. And it is the biggest change that he has had to go through. And if we're looking, especially in our high school, to allow our students to excel in honors classes, AP classes, higher education classes, those take time. They need help from the staff, they need help from people in school. That changing out of that traditional to allow those students to succeed, you got to talk to me to tell me that the traditional is going to go back to working. I know we have a date in place and we've talked about it, but I'm going through it right now, and the anxiety level of a student who wants to excel in those classes, the hours they're spending at home on homework and all of those types of things is tough for me to swallow, looking at the change from the block back to the traditional, because it became the norm again. So now we're kind of relooking at it. And when I look back at how they did block scheduling, they had different days, and it was a 6-day cycle, and it changed, and it allowed them to have music and the arts and the sports. Not just an exact 5-day schedule. You're always going to do this on a Monday and always do this on a Tuesday. It rotated and it never changed. And they still had 7 classes in a block schedule. And my personal opinion, again, I'm one student out of the 1,400 students that we have in our district. That one student, he was more successful in block scheduling than traditional, and learned more in block scheduling than he is in traditional today. So I just ask that we really make sure we're making the right decision for all of our students from top to bottom.
I'll piggyback on that. I'm sorry. I'll agree as well, but I'm also concerned about the instructional time loss for class changes.
Absolutely.
On average, you're going to lose 20 minutes a day, which is 3,600 minutes per year. And you compound that, there's a lot of lost time in the hallways, which means more discipline issues that occur during that time. If block scheduling is done correctly, with different transitions in that hour and a half time period, it could be the greatest educational experience that we could have. If it's done correctly, if we're gonna sit through a lecture for an hour and a half, I agree, it's a waste of time. But through the use of, we're going towards blended learning or flipping our classrooms with the use of our technology and Canvas, I really think that if we move away from block, I think we're gonna take a step back. That's just my opinion. And again, I'm just one person and I've seen both sides, I've worked in both. I know that if your teaching strategies are correct and you manipulate your schedule, as you said, that it's not just every day the same. You know, you could have block scheduling, have classes go year long. It happens, I've seen it. You could also vary them, go every other day in a block scheduling. I've seen that as well. So there's a lot of manipulation. I think a lot more discussion has to take place. I agree. I'm sorry, Dr. Stoker.
That's okay. Just to respond to some of those things, we were finding some inflexibility within the block schedule. When we talk about loss of time, we have a building operations period at the high school that's 42 minutes every single day that's not instructional. So there's 42 minutes times 180 that we're losing right now at the high school that can be used for instructional time.
Excuse me, what's that for now? Like,
Currently, it's building operations time. When my understanding is when we moved to a block scheduling system predating myself, that because there were blocks to prepare for, that there was a 42-minute prep time and there's a 42-minute of buildings operations time.
from on the teacher? Is what
On the
you're saying.
teacher's side,
okay,
yes.
Thank you.
So there's that 42 minutes right now that's non-instructional time. We found that within our special education population, we had students who were not getting math or ELA for potentially a year. And those are our students who struggle the most, who need the most support. So there was inflexibility there. There was not a lot of opportunity for us to provide interventions to them outside of what was designated in their IEP, potentially through their special education teacher. We had students at LCTI who we had to design specialized courses for because they didn't fit into the block scheduling based upon the time that they would need to leave and the time they would need to come back, and trying to get them into their particular labs at LCTI. So for instance, at the high school, we currently have civics that's just for LCTI students because we can't get them to be in a block because of the time they come and go. There's a variety of those types of things that came up, and we just found that the benefit of moving away from the block schedule would benefit more students, our special education population, our LCTI. We're looking to get more students into elective courses, students who already excel that we're trying to enrich through courses that we've proposed, great courses that we've proposed that we are not able to run because we can only offer so many classes in a particular day in block scheduling. So if we're allowed to move into a more traditional type of schedule, we have that ability to offer students more courses and not have to offer them every other year or not at all in some cases where we've had courses that we just couldn't run. So we're hopeful that we can make some of those changes by changing away from a block schedule to a more traditional schedule.
And if I can just close that, I'll be clear, 23-24 school year is block schedule, okay? If there's a decision to be made or continue, I'm thinking it's gonna be January of 24, February of 24. We have like a whole year to look at all the things that we need to look at to make this decision. And I think one thing Mr. Stroll and I are looking at is utilizing those building ops times for things that involve some team teaching is something that we were looking at some ideas, looking at it differently. So, but I would like to do this thing correctly, would be to put together a schedule for the 23-24 that's block scheduling, and then almost have a template of what 24-25 would look like, and even possibly 25-26. So have a 2 to 3 year plan. But keep in mind that's flexible enough that if we want to, at some point, decide, hey, we like what we see, we can continue. So it's not like we have to make this decision tonight. This decision can be made 12, 13 months down the road.
Oh, I agree. And I think Gail and I are saying the same thing. We need to explore it a little bit further and just say this is what we're doing.
Good.
That's how I feel. I also would like to take a look at what other school districts are doing with modified block scheduling, there's a lot of options out there that we could, take a look at. I don't know. When I first heard it, and this is what year 3 on the board for me, I was like, wow, that's a drastic change, and I just hope we did our diligence before we do that. That's all I'm saying.
So Stroll and I are up for it. We'll be more than happy to assist, the district in making the right decision.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
One quick question, and I'm not an educator, and I never said I was, and I never will be, but I remember when this building was open, they used to call it open concept, if anybody remembers that. And that was the thing, I see someone laughing there, Tim, and that was the thing, that was the way to go in education. And a couple of years into that, I was like, no, that's not really a good idea, okay? When we switched to block scheduling, I think many districts, if not most districts, were moving in that direction because that was the trend at that time. And I guess my question is, where are we today? Are other districts still on block? Are they back to traditional, modified block, as has been mentioned? What's the trend? I'm sorry?
I can share that data at a future meeting where we're at across the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah, I don't know what other districts are
Yeah,
doing.
you're seeing some with the block, some with the traditional, and I've had my guidance department do some research, and we put together some spreadsheets, so, when
That would
Dr.
be
Stoker.
interesting information. For example, if District A went and moved in that direction, 2 years later, they say, greatest thing we ever did, or they say, oh crap, we want to go back to block scheduling, and there might be some evidence there that could help us
There's
too.
definitely, we started that data gathering, and we'll continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to see the data.
Any other topics for Education Committee this evening? Okay, Rhonda?
Mr. Kern,
You have
I'm
something?
sorry.
are you comfortable closing the committee?
Yeah, and I apologize for being late. My fault. Yes, we can close. I'm sorry.
I'd like to open the policy committee meeting. I will turn it over to Dr. Stoker to review the 3 policies.
Thank you, Mrs. Husak. Okay, the agenda is up on the screen for the policy committee. We have 3 policies to review this evening. The first one is policy 11, which is principles for governance and leadership. This is a policy that comes up every so often based upon PSBA, that's Pennsylvania School Boards Association. That's the organization that actually gives us recommendations for policy updates. They take information from the state or from the federal government when laws are passed or case law happens, and they update policies in accordance with that. They have a wide variety of attorneys that look at the new laws and actually put together policy updates for us. This particular policy is something that is reviewed by school directors, superintendents, just to ensure that the language is reflective of what the current needs are in education. So there's a group that comes together, they updated the language, and then we, in accordance with that, update this policy. So the PSBA's governing board passed this new policy on October 30th of 2022. All of those changes are incorporated into this policy. What you see in red, I'm not sure why it's not striking those through anymore, but red is being taken out, green is being added in. The black language is language that continues to exist in there. So the green are the updates, the red is what is being taken out. So these are essentially what the school board says their purpose is. Does anybody have questions on this policy? Okay, hearing none, do we have the ability from the board members present to move this to next Monday for a first reading at the board level?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, our next policy is policy 718.1, therapy dogs, therapy animals in schools. This is a policy that is not recommended by PSBA. It's a policy that came into existence because of more school districts having therapy animals in their particular buildings. So there are a few districts across Pennsylvania who have created their own policy in advance of PSBA coming out with a policy. Typically what happens is some districts will come out with policies, and then as it becomes more widespread, PSBA will come out with a recommended policy. In this case, we reached out to PSBA because we are seeing therapy dogs in our schools. We've had some in the past in Slatington. We currently have them in the middle school as well. We have a therapy dog program. And recently we've had a request to have goats in the high school. There's therapy goats that have done goat yoga and different things like that, especially
On the high school grounds, on the campuses, not
Yep.
in the buildings, just to clarify.
So Northwestern Lehigh is a school district that has been participating in that program. With other people participating in that program, it's come to us and they've asked whether or not they can do something like that at our high school. So we wanted to make sure that as this continues to grow and we see more therapy dogs in our schools and potentially other animals like therapy goats on our grounds, that we would have a policy that kind of spells out what needs to happen, so that we had some clear language. So this policy is completely new. It's not something, as I said, that existed previously for Northern Lehigh, and it's something that we pulled from other districts that have policies in this area. So there were, I believe, 3 schools that had policies that were therapy dog policies that we took. We kind of made it an amalgamation of those policies and then put some information in here about other service animals. So the policy is mainly written for therapy dogs, and then also at the end there's a kind of a clause that it can be for other animals as well, with the discretion of administration, vetting that process. So the purpose of this essentially is to have therapy animals for our staff and for our students as needed for social, emotional, mental health, wellness. Definitions are there of what a service animal is and how that's different from an emotional support animal, what a therapy animal is, a therapy dog, and then the handler. Responsibility is on that of the handler. If we should have an employee that's a handler, it speaks to that as well. The guidelines are there for therapy dogs. We would have to have dogs that are registered. A licensed veterinarian would have to make sure that the dog is healthy. There would need to be proof of license for the dog through a licensing authority, and any insurance policy that covers liability for that animal in the event that something happens. Standards and procedures are here. So for it to be permitted onto school district property, there needs to be a request. Training and certification needs to exist. There needs to be notification. So if we do have therapy dogs or other therapy animals, we would notify parents or guardians. So if you wanted to opt your child out of participation, you can. If there's allergies, things of that nature that, you're ahead of time, about that. Health, safety, and vaccinations would be a consideration for the animals to be here. Identification, the therapy animal would have to wear appropriate identification if it's a dog. Handler needs to be in control at all times of that animal. Supervision and care of the animal. Allergies and aversions we talked about. Insurance we talked about. If there should be any damages or injuries, that they would be responsible for that. And then at the very bottom, other therapy animals, because they don't all fall into categories where they're licensed the same way as therapy dogs. For instance, the goats, as we talked about. So this is a policy that we were looking to put for first reading at the board meeting next Monday, so that we can continue with the therapy dogs that we have on campus that are coming in through some of our schools, but then also potentially have a goat therapy program as part of the high school and what they're looking to do. They're looking currently, the proposal is for them to bring therapy goats in during Keystone exams for students who have anxiety and things of that nature around testing time in the spring, so that they can come out, they can pet the goats, they can interact with the goats, and then go into their testing to alleviate some of the anxiety. Any questions on this policy?
Do we have to do anything with our own insurance of any sort to have animals on campus?
So our requirement is that the handlers, trainers, owners have their insurance. And I think that's the only requirement through our
Correct.
insurance.
Yeah. Okay. And is the animal, so these are considered therapy dogs, so are they here full-time or only at times?
No, they're only here at times.
So not a service dog at all?
Correct.
This is only therapy
They are
dogs?
different, yes, correct.
Yep.
I'll have Mr. Hauser, do you want to speak about the therapy dog that you have coming in currently?
Sure. So as
He's
part
awesome.
of our Bulldogs determined in the second marking period, this is Shannon Jones, who is our Tier 1 Inspire Program Coordinator, reached out to someone locally who works with therapy dogs. And we did that just kind of as like an overview. One of our essential skills is perseverance. So as kids face challenges, we need to make sure they were educated on a litany of things that can help them overcome their challenges. And one of the things we thought was kind of outside the box was working with animals. So the handler came in, talked about the benefits of working with therapy animals. And if that part wasn't for the kids, she also talked about what it's like just being a professional who works with animals and what her years working with animals is like. So some kids got some education in that as well. But every student was at least exposed to the idea, and the dog has come in, and I should say that dog, Valentino, the most popular person at the middle school, well, dog at the middle school, has come in maybe 6-7 times with different groups of rotating groups there. So you can always tell when Valentino's in the middle school because no one is in my main office. And all the ladies run to the library and Valentino. But yeah, it's been very good, and kids have responded very well.
We're actually seeing more at the IU. The IU just adopted a therapy dog, similar thing. Lassie is her name, so she'll be coming on board too. But same thing. We're going through it's the new thing, right? So it's how do we help cope with the anxiety and challenges, and if it is a fluffy, cute dog that comes in, Valentina, who is very fluffy. Or baby goats, I guess.
Well, I got to experience Coco at Lehigh Valley. They actually brought the dog around for employees that were in areas. I'm not sure about clinical area. This was non-clinical. Coco it's just awesome. It just gave you a little break from the day. Very positive feelings from that. And I miss Coco terribly. Coco was cool. So.
If anyone wants to see Valentino, he did come with headshots. The kids made me hang them up throughout the door. They are all.
Okay, any questions on that policy? All right, do we have the permission of the board members present to move that for a first reading on Monday at the board meeting?
Yes.
Anyone at this table gonna oppose a fluffy dog? Don't do that.
Only if the dog's unpronounceable.
I know, right?
I think I'm getting old. I remember the time when you brought a gun to school, that was okay, but if you brought a dog, you got thrown out. And that was, it's on 180 degrees from there, where it's the other way around. So, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Our last policy this evening is policy 808, that's food service. Food service is a policy that comes up regularly. We look at this as well as our wellness policy. On average, within every 3 years, we bring this back to the Education Committee to take a look at. Specifically, we brought this here because of Act 55 of 2022. There were some revisions to the school code because of that. And we, over the past year, and then moving forward, during the pandemic, we had a situation where students who were free and reduced lunch would either get their lunch free or reduced. However, Nikki and Mr. Link applied for and were granted permission to have free and reduced, 100% free and reduced for the district through what's called the CEP program, the Community Eligibility Provision Program. Nikki, do you want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll jump into the policy changes?
Yeah, so the CEP program basically provides universal free meals for breakfast and lunch to all students in all schools. And with that, it's based on our direct certification percentages in the community, meaning like anybody that is directly certified through SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, homeless, foster, that whole population. And we get reimbursed a little bit differently through this program in terms of like our meal counts, but we're seeing a lot of success with it in terms of like our participation being higher. And it just overall, I think, has been a good transition coming off of COVID, especially with, you know, financial strengths of everybody in the community and, you know, things like that. So far, you know, we're halfway through the year under this new program. It does not require you to complete the traditional free or reduced meal applications anymore. So, because like I said, it's all based on, it's not income-based per se in that sense, but more so established through the direct certification population. And that is something that I see you have it listed here, we are eligible for based on the fact that the percentage that they require for that direct certification went up from prior years, so we were never eligible until this past year. So, like I said, it's been a good transition coming off of the pandemic so far.
So thank you to the work of Mrs. Fink and Mr. Link that put the time into that application. We actually had it for last year, for this year, and we're eligible for 2 more years. So for 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, and 25, 26. So what happened is because we're working underneath that CEP program, our policy wasn't really applicable because that dealt with paying customers, free and reduced meal plan as well. So PSBA made some changes to their policy, and they said you can either have the version that's paying customers free and reduced, or if you're under the CEP option, here's how to make some changes to your policy. So we spent some time going through the policy, knowing that we are approved for 4 years for that option, and made some changes so that this policy works for CEP. But then if this is something that goes away after that, that when we revert back, this policy will continue to work if we're back again to paying customers and free and reduced. So the changes that are in here are based upon the changes to the law, the fact that we applied for CEP, and that you know, we may eventually get back to what that was previously. So you'll see in green the CEP provision that's been added there to talk about universal free meals, and then lower down the things that are in red are what we're taking out of that policy. Mainly they relate to paying customers free and reduced, things that wouldn't work under CEP. Okay, so those are the changes that were made for those reasons. Does anybody have questions on what was added or deleted from the policy?
No, I just think it's great that the kids can get free meals for the next few years.
Agreed.
A big relief to the parents.
Definitely.
Do we have the permission of the board members present to move this policy for a first reading to Monday night's board meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for the policy committee this evening? Okay.
I'd like to close the policy meeting and turn it over to Mr. Disler for technology, buildings, and grounds.
Thank you, Mrs. Susak, and welcome everyone.
You want to switch?
We should come up with more hot topics, and maybe we'll have, you know, just as good a crowd. I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Durr. Mr. Durr, go ahead.
Oops, sorry.
No, it's all right.
Oh, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting this evening. The first item on the agenda is basically a quick update on the softball, baseball complex, solar array projects. The latest and newest information that I have is all bulletized on the agenda. I think ELA Sport and McClure are still continuing to partner together, working on what will be needed for permitting. And I guess at that point, do any of the board members have any questions on the latest information?
Yeah, so, just reading here the agenda. Yeah. So it looks like based off of the wetlands discovery, looks like it might be recommended to proceed with the baseball softball complex while waiting on the other permits. Is that correct?
So with the topographical survey that the surveying company completed, they did identify 5 wetlands in the proposed solar area. And what this means, probably, we don't have all the information yet, but it looks like the permitting process to Lehigh County Conservation Office will take longer than the softball, baseball project. We don't have all the answers yet. Can the projects be separated? We do not know that answer yet. If they could be, there is the option that softball project could move forward while the permitting process for the solar array continues. But it does look like the solar array project will take longer through the conservation office than baseball, softball.
So you just said you're not sure if one could exist without the other. So,
Correct.
so
We're hoping to get direction, and I say we, meaning ELA Sport, who's really spearheading that investigation, working with the Conservation Office. We're waiting on them to get a definite answer from the Conservation Office. If they could be split, maybe that would be what the board members would choose to do, allowing one project to move forward and while the other one takes a little longer. But we don't have a definite answer on that yet.
well, I think I can probably speak for most of the people out there and why they're here today is because the idea of the solar panel field going in an area that is currently wooded, approximately a 5 to 7 acre lot, I believe, or 6.25, whatever, I forget what it was. A lot of people are concerned about that field itself because you're moving a wooded area that now happens to be in a wetland to go green. And to me, that seems a little hypocritical.
Can you help me understand again, Mr. Dern? I know it was part of the original presentation. The reason why we can't put solar panels on our roofs. I know there was discussion about it and I'm just trying to rewrap it in my head. I apologize.
I suppose putting them on the roof is an option.
Well, hold on.
No, there was a reason. We weren't able to for
Sure.
some reason.
So we just replaced all of our roofs. And the amount of space isn't equal to, the amount of surface area is not equal to the 5 acres of solar field area that we would need. In other words, we don't have enough rooftop space to accommodate the size grid that we would like. Sir, I see your hand, but we're gonna go through the board members first, and then I'll go down the list of people that signed up. So,
Just to confirm, do we know how much, if we did put them on the roof, how much that would cover of our energy cost?
we do not currently know the answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah, and like.
I'm more concerned now, hearing the permits coming back. I was a little concerned before and I was on the fence. Now I'm really concerned knowing that there's some wetlands back there and there's some other things that occur and one, our own maintenance people would have to go and maintain that. Now we're going into wetlands area, we're going into areas that something's just not adding up in my mind, so I'm just trying to put everything back together.
Before I ask questions about this portion, the Peters Elementary portion, is that mapped the same or didn't that move?
It has not yet moved.
But do we think it's gonna move?
We don't yet know the answer to that.
Okay,
They're coming out to do a site survey to see if the water treatment plant drain fields
that's okay.
would be, when they put the footers in, if it would disturb the drain fields.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions from the?
I would go back to permits.
Sure.
I thought there was some discussion originally that we could only work on one permit at a time, and that was part of the reason for combining the permits. And also, there was a financial incentive that if we did both of them together, we would pay one $30,000 fee instead of two $30,000 fees, and we would be ahead. Is that still in the picture, or if we drop the solar panel now for the baseball field, does that mean we can't start that process until the other one is completed? Which I think was the conversation when the gentleman was here from the baseball field when he suggested putting it together, and I don't know where that's gone.
So the information that we have, the information that was presented from the ELA Sport at, I believe, two meetings ago, that normally the Conservation Office likes to keep all of your construction into one permit. So it was advantageous to do the topographical study for both areas, which was completed for $30,000. The only difference is if we wanted to move forward, if the Conservation Office says we could split them, because that's what we're working on determining. ELA Sport is working on that.
Okay.
Because the area where the softball field, baseball field complex will go was already currently or was reviewed by the Conservation Office when we did a lot of work with the stadium. So a lot of preliminary work for the site where baseball, softball complex would go was already complete, and the Conservation Office is familiar with it. So they need to tell us if we would be allowed to split the projects.
Do you have any idea of the time frame?
On determining whether or not they can be split, we're hoping to have that information in the next couple weeks. I know that ELA Sport is working with the Conservation Office, and I think they had a preliminary meeting set up to talk about this. You know, could they be split? But I would expect in the next 2 or 3 weeks that we would have an answer.
Thank you.
There are other board member questions before I open it up to the list of people that signed up. And if there are people that would like to talk that have not signed up, we will call on you. So, but first, any other board members? Mr. Chrisman.
Yeah, just real quick, I think, just reading this and listening to Mr. Durr and hearing the details, I think if it's possible to proceed with the baseball and softball project without the solar project, that would have my vote. If that was possible.
We should know that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chrisman. Any others? Mr. Dissler, it looked like you were going to raise your hand for...
That,
It looked like you were going to say something.
no, I'm just listening to all the intake coming in. It's too early really to make a decision until we get all the results.
Yeah, and we're not looking for any sort of action this evening.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to go down the list here. Some people kind of check the boxes. Some people put question marks. So I'm going to kind of go down the list. If I do not call your name once I get through the list, just kind of signal to me and I'll go calling people that way then. Okay, the first one was Mrs. Williams. You kind of have a question mark there.
Yeah, well, I could have a bunch, and I probably will talk with the rest of the people. first question is, I saw you mentioned, the first bullet says that you had an agenda. The coordination meeting, was that the school board meeting, or was that a private meeting, a public meeting? What did you mean that there was a coordination meeting? How
That was an administrative meeting with
Behind closed
ELA
doors.
Sport, McClure, and I forget where the other engineer was from.
So why was that behind closed doors and not to the public?
That was an administrative meeting. Yeah. So let me clarify that. There were no board members at that school board, at that meeting. It was administration and the engineers, which is a very common process whenever we're going through a project.
Okay, all right, no problem. I just was wondering with that.
Sure.
If I missed that meeting.
Good question.
I have a bunch of questions, but I'm just gonna add, I'm just gonna start with,
Yeah, and I'm
pictures?
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Mrs. Williams. We are gonna run a 5-minute clock for each person, like we do
Okay,
when we
that's
signed
not-
up. We're gonna run a 5-minute clock. And we'll start that with our next question.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna hold my questions. Well, now I'm gonna, well, if you wanna start the clock, you can, but I've been coming to these meetings for 9 years now at a public, like we're speaking to each other. Now you're gonna time us? I've never, in 9 years, been to one of these committee meetings that I was timed.
Yeah,
And now tonight, I understand, but I'll let some other people talk before because we probably have the same questions.
Sure.
But I don't think that's right. I understand a school board meeting, 5 minutes, but we're just here to discuss. I don't think that's not right. So I'll pass.
Community wants to ask
want-
questions without feeling pressured to get their questions
That's not right.
answered. And when we're put into these time constraints,
Yeah.
it makes it very difficult for us to have a good understanding of what the school board wants to do. We are not all opposed to these
So I will
solar
address that. We did switch that procedure, and when we were moving through the pandemic, when we were scheduling things with 5 minutes. I will look to the board if they want to expand that this evening. But, you know, we have to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to speak.
Is there any way you could have a special meeting for the concern of this solar panel development? That it could be just dedicated for that?
I will look to the board for
Discussion
direction on
just on
that.
that solar panel.
Do you want to summarize like what's
What?
happened? Do you want to like summarize what's happened or not happened up to this point?
I don't know if that's my position to do that. I would like to, but I don't know why I got in the center of this, but.
Sorry.
I think it's absolutely imperative that every person who has a concern has the opportunity to address that. I think that's very important. I also think we can drag on and on and on for hours, and I've been at those meetings where I've seen 10 people stand up and make the same comment, and it's like, you know, Rush Limbaugh used to say, just say ditto and move on, you know. So I don't know, is there a compromise where we can maybe do 5 minutes, and if we get done, if maybe
Like-
someone else will
like
pick up
it's
your
like not
questions or
enough
answer your
or-
questions,
Yeah.
and then maybe we can come back to that at the end. It's just a suggestion that I'm throwing out, because I don't want to cut you off either. I want to hear what you have to say, but I don't want to have 7 people in a row say the same thing, I guess, is what I'm saying, you know, so.
I also,
Yeah,
would
like
be
that's what I like.
The decision for the board members.
Exactly, that's not my decision, and
I'm gonna pass, well, not pass, but I'm gonna let somebody else start a conversation, and maybe they might ask my question.
well, that's my point. They might ask the same questions that you
Our
have,
list
yeah.
of questions might actually answer everybody's questions.
Yeah.
But then somebody else might wanna talk about the same topic, but in a different sense. That's why.
Or we can yield our time to her.
People can yield their time to
You know, I don't wanna be the speaker of it, but I just don't.
I agree with what Matt, they do
Will
it
will the board at this point go along with 5 minutes, and if we have time at the end, come back? Can we do that, or not?
Midnight.
Yes, no, yes, no, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
As long as it doesn't go
yes,
to midnight.
yes,
As long as it's
yes.
not midnight.
Well, yeah, like
Well,
Okay,
you
but we're
know,
gonna
this
put
is
it
the
on-
discussion meeting
topic,
anyway.
you know, like-
Listen, we all understand this is a highly emotional
Absolutely.
position for some people. Obviously, I'm going to just speak for Bob Kern. I'm looking at taking in everybody's opinion, what they feel. We also have to look at financial things that, you know, to run our district. that are going to impact certain things in the community, and I understand that's a balancing act, that's why we have the seat. But I am in favor of hearing everybody, obviously, no matter what their opinion is.
1, 2, 3, Gary? You okay with that? 5 minutes, and if we have time, come back? That's fine. We're 5, any problem with it? Okay, so, okay, we just made a new rule, thank you for helping with that, and it's all your fault.
Well, okay, I have a question, so my 5 minutes, but I may not be my 5 minutes, I'm gonna ask you, was there an environmental impact study done? No, you got the floor, I don't.
Yes, they're working on it.
So now you're 5 minutes, so there wasn't an impact
Yes,
study done?
they're working on it, is that, if I say
That's what
something
they're
wrong,
working.
correct
So
me.
we've done the
Environment.
We've done the wetland study. If any of the other ordinances or departments require us to do additional environmental impact studies, we will comply.
Is that knowledge for the public? Can we get copies of that after the studies are done?
Yeah, it'll be shared out just like the wetland study.
Okay. Another one. In 30 years, when, say, these solar panels are no longer productive, what are you going to do with them? I've had some people say.
So I can answer
they're
that.
not
I can answer your
recyclable,
question.
recyclable. Yes.
Sure. McClure Company will remove them. It's all part, it's
In
all.
30 years, they're going to remove them.
Yes.
Who's going to pay for them to be replaced?
It's all part of the contract. They come and they take them away. We give them no additional money.
Go ahead.
Real quick, can I?
So in 30 years, they take them and the project's done, is that what?
If that's the will of the board at that time.
So in 30 years,
Can I ask you a question? So we have the option to do the lease or the own. Obviously, when we first go into it, it has to be an initial 5-year lease.
Correct.
After that 5 years, we have the option to continue to lease or take ownership by a prorated deal, right?
Correct.
So if we choose the ownership route, do they still haul them out in 30 years, or is that only if it's part of?
why would they remove them if we own them?
That would be
Right.
the burden placed on the district then to remove, if the district decides to remove them, if they were to purchase them.
So the removal would only be really intact if we opt to stay the lease for the
Correct.
entire 30-year period.
Correct.
Okay.
If you do put these solar panels, is there going to be a fence put around them?
Yes.
Is there going to be lighting and security? Or will the fence provide that?
We will not light them. It's to the discretion of the board if they would want to put
Security?
like security cameras.
If somebody would damage them, who pays for that, McClure?
They're owned by McClure.
As long as they're owned.
Yeah.
So this is all, if we continue leasing them, it's going to fall back on McClure.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll let somebody else say it.
Well, how about I go down the list here before we can just kind of open it up. The next one, Ms. Wanamaker, it looks like you said no to comment.
I did, but I do have a question at this point. What is the?
I'm going to come back to you then. We're going to go through the list and then we'll come back. Okay. Jessica Haldeman, you didn't check yes or no. You just put technology building. Okay, thank you. Joshua Haldeman, you did not check yes or no. You just put technology, buildings and grounds.
I live directly across the street.
Okay.
And so you're putting a fence and solar panels, like that's what we're gonna see, that's what we're gonna look at?
So right now, there will be an offset from the road into the property.
I understand that.
So we're looking, that offset right now from the road has to, I believe, 50 foot?
I believe it was 50 foot.
A minimum of 50 foot in.
This room is 30 foot wide.
But then, the panels are how high?
Right now, we're being told that, and again, they have to go through final design. We're being told that the highest part of the panel, once on the racking, would be about 5 foot.
And how high would the fence be?
The fence by code, I believe, has to be a minimum of 7 foot.
Okay. So the fence is higher than
What
what
does it see that
the
fence? Are you
is.
gonna put a steel fence up that you can't see nothing, or you're gonna put a fence?
It would be a chain link fence.
Big chain link fence.
So my kid walks through the nature trail to get to football practice and all that stuff, so he's gonna have to find another route through there.
Yes.
And we live on Welchtown Road, which is super busy, there's no sidewalks, there is zero safe way for him to walk.
I believe the school district offers busing for Welchtown. I'm not sure where you're.
Football practice.
He was stuck in my practices.
Well, after practice, we run an activity bus as well. So. Okay, Lauren, I'm sorry, it looks like Guar, if I'm mispronouncing it.
Lauren, answer.
Oh, Ganser. Ah, sorry, I couldn't read, I'm sorry, I couldn't read it.
I checked, did I check anything?
You did not, my apologies. So we'll come back to you if you do have a question.
I just have one quick question.
We'll come back, just so I can
Okay.
follow the pattern here. Mrs. Snyder, you have yes?
Yes. A couple questions. First, how much does it cost to lease these annually? How much are we paying annually for the lease of these?
Do you have the spreadsheet with you?
I was hoping Fleur would be doing their proposal again tonight, but I guess.
No, they weren't on the agenda this evening.
Kilowatt hours generated.
So the first,
It's not like that.
I think it was very big.
For just the high school.
We don't know exactly how much we're making, we just know how much we're saving.
yes.
No, but we should.
I would.
If someone wants to look for that, I can continue to ask questions.
Yeah.
My next question.
So I can, so it varies
Right.
by year over the 30-year lease. What we're looking at is 193,000 for the first year, a little bit over, down to 268,805. Every year, that is less than what we're currently paying for utilities through our consortium purchasing.
So that would bring my other question of what are we paying in electric utilities annually?
Again, so for first year or kilowatt hours, we're looking at our hours are over 2 million, right? And we're projected to do that about 2 million through the course of each year for 30 years. And the table I have here doesn't have those lists here in front of me.